but you are bound as the new owner under the remaining terms of that existing lease. There's probably two ways to look at that. There's what could happen before the closing occurs. So from signing that contract until the closing date, anything can go wrong in a typical closing process, just like whether or not it's an investment or a rental. And then after closing, you acquire this rental. In theory, there's an existing tenant in there, and then everything that could go wrong liability-wise. So before you close, you're going to have a contract presented to the seller. The seller signs it. You should know when you're writing that contract to present to the seller whether or not that's a tenant-occupied property. That's something that the seller would let you know. You would be buying it based on the rental income and make your decision. There's a provision in the contract that says this property is occupied and subject to a lease. You as the buyer have to honor that lease for the remainder of the lease term. So you should always get a copy of that lease, review that, make sure you're comfortable with the terms of that lease, because you're going to inherit that as the new owner, as the new landlord. So if you don't like the terms of that, whether it's the amount of money, whether it's some of the liability provisions, know that up front. Know that during your inspection period, because if you see that lease and you don't like how that's written, you shouldn't buy that property, or you should see if you can get an amendment to that lease by the seller, because he's the ability to contract with the tenant. So you'll know going into that transaction, there's a tenant subject to this lease. I'm ultimately inheriting that lease. I have to honor it. And then, of course, when that lease comes up for renewal, you can decide if you want to renew it under new terms.